The phone rang at 3:47 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I always do now that my wife is gone, and the house feels too big and too quiet all at once. I almost didn't answer it. Unknown number. At that hour. I figured it was one of those robocalls, the kind that somehow slipped through even with the blocker my son-in-law installed for me last Thanksgiving. But something made me pick up. I still can't explain what. Pop. That's what he called me. Pop. Not dad, not father, Pop. The way he said it when he was 9 years old and wanted me to come watch him pitch at Little League. The way he said it at his mother's funeral when he thought I couldn't hear him crying in the hallway outside her hospital room. The way nobody had said it in 38 years. My hand went cold against the phone. I sat up in the dark, and I remember thinking my heart had stopped, that maybe I was the one dying, that this was what it felt like. Your dead son's voice in the middle of the night, calm as anything, calling you Pop like no time had passed at all. "Who is this?" I said, and he said, "It's Richie. My son Richard died on March 14th, 1987. He was 23 years old. He'd been traveling west, driving his old Datsun pickup from Columbus, Ohio, where he'd been living with 2 roommates and working at a warehouse while he figured out what to do with his life. Richie was always in the middle of figuring something out. He had a restless streak in him that I think he got from my side of the family. His grandfather was the same way, never satisfied, always just about to turn a corner into something better. He was heading to Portland. His college roommate had moved out there and said there was construction work. Good money, and Richie had always been handy. I told him to call me when he got there. I told him to take the interstates, not the shortcuts. He didn't call. 2 days later, the Wyoming Highway Patrol contacted us. There had been an accident on Route 30 out near a stretch called Muddy Gap, a 2-lane road through a whole lot of nothing. They found his truck down an embankment. The weather had been bad, ice on the road. The truck had gone through a guardrail and rolled. They told us they'd found a man near the vehicle. He'd been thrown from the cab. No seatbelt. He was deceased. His wallet was still in his jacket. Richard James Alderman, of Columbus, Ohio. His license, his social security card. A photo of me and his mother that we'd given him when he left home for college. The one where we're standing in front of the house at Christmas. Snow on the roof. Everybody squinting into the sun. My daughter and I drove out to identify him. It was the worst thing I have ever done in my life. The worst thing I hope I ever have to do. We buried him in the cemetery 2 miles from the house where he grew up, next to his grandmother, under an oak tree he used to climb when he was small. That was 38 years ago. I have lived an entire second life since then. My daughter got married. I have 3 grandchildren who call me Grandpa and argue about what to watch on TV when they come for Christmas. I remarried briefly in 1996, and that didn't work out, which is a story for another time. I retired from the utility company after 31 years. I learned to make my own bread during the pandemic because there was nothing else to do. I thought about Richie every day. I want to be honest about that. Not every minute. You can't survive it if it's every minute. But every day, yes. A thought here, a flash of memory there. The way he laughed too loud at his own jokes. The way he ate cereal standing over the sink because he said sitting down to eat breakfast alone was depressing. The Ohio State sweatshirt he wore until it was practically transparent. I didn't expect anything to change. You reach a certain age and you make a kind of peace with your losses. Not a happy peace, just the kind where you can breathe. And then my phone rang at 3:47 in the morning. "Richie died in 1987, I said into the phone. My voice was very steady, which surprised me. "I don't know who you are, but you need to tell me right now." "I know," he said. "I know you think that. I know what the records say. But, Pop, I've been alive this whole time. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know anything. I should have hung up. I know that. My son-in-law would have told me to hang up immediately, that it was a scam, that there are people who prey on old men who've lost children, who dig through obituaries and old news stories and piece together just enough to sound convincing. I know all of that, but there was something in his voice. Not just the word, not just Pop. Something in the way he breathed between sentences. Something in the rhythm of it. Something I hadn't heard in almost 4 decades, that I didn't even know I'd remembered until it was suddenly there again. "What happened to you?" I said. And he told me. He said he woke up in a hospital in Casper, Wyoming, in the spring of 1987. He didn't know his name. He didn't know where he was. He had a serious head injury, a fracture on the right side of his skull, 3 broken ribs, a shattered kneecap. He'd been unconscious for 11 days. Nobody came looking for him. That's what he was told. The staff at the hospital had him listed as a John Doe. They ran his fingerprints and got nothing. This was 1987. The systems weren't what they are now. They put his description out on a few regional bulletins and waited, and nobody claimed him. He said he eventually pieced together, through years of fragmented dreams and flashes, through therapy, he'd finally started getting in the last decade, that he'd been walking along the road after the accident. His truck was wrecked. He'd gotten out and started walking, which is what people sometimes do in shock, and he'd wandered almost 2 miles before collapsing. By the time they found him, he was nowhere near the vehicle. Nobody connected him to the crash. Somebody else had been in his truck. He didn't know who. He still doesn't know who. But somebody had been in the passenger seat of his Datsun that night, and that somebody was the one they found. That somebody had his wallet. He'd given a ride to a hitchhiker somewhere in Nebraska. He remembered that much, or believed he remembered it, the way you believe the things that come back to you in pieces over many years. A young guy, friendly, traveling light. "I've been living as someone else my whole life," he said. "Not on purpose. I became whoever they told me I was, and then I built a life on top of that. And for a long time I thought that was just who I was. I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair in the dark for a long time after the call, and then I turned on the lamp and sat in the light for a while, and then I went and stood at the kitchen window watching the sky go from black to gray, to the particular pale blue of early morning in November. I thought about calling my daughter. She lives 40 minutes away and she would have answered, but I didn't want to say it out loud yet. Saying it out loud felt like it would break something, either the hope or me. The man on the phone, this man who said he was Richie, had given me a phone number and an address in Spokane, Washington. He said he'd been living there for the past 19 years. He said he had a wife and a grown stepson. He said he'd been a finished carpenter for most of his working life, that he was good with his hands. And when he said that, I had to put the phone against my chest for a moment because Richie had been good with his hands. He built a bookshelf for his mother when he was 17. Measured twice, cut once. She kept it in the bedroom until the day she died. I didn't tell him that. Not yet. I wasn't ready to give him things he could use. My daughter didn't believe it. I called her the next morning, after I'd had coffee and thought through what I was going to say, and she listened all the way through without interrupting, which is not like her, and then she was quiet for a moment and said, "Dad, you know what this sounds like. I know what it sounds like. There are people who do this. There are people who specifically, I know, and you're grieving, Mom. You've been alone in that house for 2 years and you're grieving and your defenses are down, and this is exactly the kind of thing that—" "I want a DNA test," I said. She was quiet again. "If it's not him, the test will tell us," I said. "And if it is him—" I couldn't finish that sentence. She couldn't finish it either. We sat on the phone together, not saying anything for what felt like a long time. "Okay," she finally said. "Okay, but I'm coming with you." We drove to Spokane. My daughter drove because she said she didn't trust me to focus on the road, which was probably fair. It's a long drive from where we live in eastern Idaho, about 3 hours, and we didn't talk much. She had the radio on, one of those stations that plays soft hits from the 70s and 80s, and at some point a song came on that Richie used to like, something by Tom Petty, and we both pretended not to notice. He was waiting for us at a diner he'd suggested, a place called Hendricks on Division Street. Corner booth, cup of coffee already in front of him. I saw him through the window before we went in. He was 60 years old, same age Richie would have been. He had gray at his temples and a face that had spent a lot of time in weather, and he was heavier than Richie had been, broader in the chest and shoulders, the way men get when they do physical work for decades. He was wearing a canvas jacket, dark green. I stood on the sidewalk outside that diner for longer than I should have. My daughter took my arm. He stood up when we walked in. He didn't come toward us. He just stood there, hands at his sides, and the look on his face was the one I recognized, the one that didn't come from a story or a scheme or an obituary somebody dug up. It was the look of someone who has spent a long time being terrified of exactly this moment. Richie used to get that look before anything important, before baseball tryouts, before he asked his prom date to prom, before he got in his Datsun and drove west. We talked for almost 4 hours. He told me things. Some of them I verified afterward. The layout of the house he grew up in, the name of the dog we had when he was in middle school. A fight we'd had when he was 19 that I hadn't thought about in decades. One I was not proud of and had never told anyone. He knew about that fight. He knew what we'd said to each other and how it ended, which was badly at the time, and then better later, the way those things eventually go if you're lucky. My daughter sat very still through most of it. She asked questions, practical, specific questions, the kind designed to catch someone who's done their research but not lived the thing. He didn't flinch from any of them. A couple of times he got details wrong in small ways, but when she pointed them out, he didn't try to cover it up or explain it away. He just said, "I'm not sure about that. My memory from before the accident is still patchy in places. It always has been." That rang true to me. Somebody running a con would have had the details tighter, would have rehearsed, would not have been comfortable saying "I don't know." Near the end of the conversation, he reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the table between us. It was a photograph, faded, bent at one corner, laminated in a sleeve of clear plastic that was yellowing at the edges. A photo of me and my wife standing in front of our house at Christmas. Snow on the roof, squinting into the sun, the other copy of that photo. The one he'd had in his jacket pocket when they found him. Except they hadn't found him. They'd found someone else, someone with his wallet. And somehow this photo had made it back to the man who'd carried it. I reached out and touched it with one finger, and I didn't say anything for a while. The DNA test took 8 days. 8 days is a very long time when you are 67 years old, and your son may or may not have come back from the dead. I didn't know what to do with myself. I went for walks. I watched things on television without remembering what I'd watched. I called my daughter twice a day, and we talked around the subject, and then directly at it, and then around it again. I thought about the grave. That's the thing that kept coming back to me, and I know it came back to my daughter too, because she brought it up on the 4th day, gently, the way she brings up things she knows are going to hurt. "If it's him," she said, "then who's in the cemetery?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. Somebody's son is in that ground. Somebody was on that road in Wyoming in March 1987, and they died, and they were buried under my son's name, and somewhere there is a family that never got a phone call, or got one, and was told something different, or never got closure at all. A young man who disappeared and was never explained. I think about that family. I have thought about little else since this began. My daughter and I talked to a lawyer. We talked to the local sheriff's department. We contacted Wyoming's cold case unit, which I didn't know existed until I needed it to. The process of figuring out who is in that grave is not fast and it is not simple, but it has started, and I want whoever he was to have a name again. I want his people to know. The results came on a Tuesday afternoon. My daughter was at my house. She'd taken to stopping by every day that week, bringing food I wasn't eating, watching me not eat it. We were sitting at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. The probability of first-degree biological relationship. I won't say the number. I don't need to. You understand what I mean when I tell you that I put the phone down on the table, and my daughter looked at my face and burst into tears. Not sad tears. The other kind. The kind that come from somewhere so deep that they have no name. He came to the house in December. I cooked pot roast, which his mother used to make every Sunday, which Richie ate approximately 10,000 servings of over the course of his childhood, and which I had not made since she died because it felt too lonely to make it for one person. I made it for 3, me, my daughter, my son-in-law, and then I made it for 4. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at the stove, and he didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "That smells like every Sunday morning I can almost remember." I turned back to the pot because I didn't want him to see my face right then. We ate dinner. My grandchildren came over after, which I hadn't planned but which turned out to be right. They didn't know the whole story yet. Just that they were meeting someone important, and they were noisy and curious, and normal, and that normalcy was a gift I didn't know I needed. My youngest grandson, who is 11 and has no sense of occasion, asked him if he knew how to play Minecraft. He said he didn't. My grandson offered to teach him. He said he'd like that. After dinner, after my daughter and son-in-law had taken the kids home, we sat in the living room, just the two of us, for the first time. The house was quiet. The lamp was on. It was snowing a little outside, the light kind that doesn't stick. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay," I said. "I've lived a whole life. It wasn't your life, the one I was supposed to have, but it was a life, and I don't regret most of it. I have people who love me out there. I'm not asking you to replace any of that." He stopped, looked at his hands. I just didn't want to die without you knowing I was alive. That's the only reason I called. I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me, but I thought you had the right to know. I thought about the cemetery, the oak tree. 38 years of going there on his birthday, and at Christmas, and sometimes in the middle of ordinary Tuesdays for no reason, except that it was something I could do. I've been talking to you for 38 years, I said. To a stone with your name on it. You have no idea how glad I am that you can finally talk back. He laughed. Not the way I remembered. His voice was different, lower, worn into something rougher by decades I wasn't there for. But the laugh underneath it, the one that cracked open like something couldn't hold it anymore, that one I knew. There are things we haven't figured out. There are things we may never figure out. The process with the grave is ongoing and complicated, and I have been told to be patient, and patience has never been my strong suit. The man who was buried as my son had no ID on him except what he carried in that wallet. The wallet belonged to Richie, but the man inside the truck didn't. Someone out there has been missing a son, or a brother, or a friend since 1987, and they don't know where he is. And I think about them more than I can say. I know what it's like to be that family. I lived it. My daughter has gotten a little better at saying his name. It still costs her something. I can see it in her face every time, but she says it. She said it at Christmas, when we all sat down at the table together for the first time, when she raised her glass and said, "To Richie, who we somehow got back." He ducked his head. I don't think he was expecting that. I wasn't sure what I expected either, from any of this. You spend most of a lifetime carrying a grief and it becomes load-bearing. You're not sure who you are without it. You're not sure what you do with your hands when the weight is gone. What I do, it turns out, is call him on Sunday afternoons. We don't always have a lot to say. Sometimes we talk about the weather or what he's working on. He's building a deck for his stepson this spring. Pressure-treated lumber, the whole thing. Sometimes I tell him things about his mother that he half remembers and half doesn't. Sometimes we just sit there on the phone, quiet, the way you can with someone when silence doesn't need to be filled. Last Sunday I told him about the bookshelf, the one he built for his mother when he was 17, measured twice, cut once. I told him it's still in my bedroom, that I kept it when we cleaned out the house, that I look at it every single morning when I get up, that it's the first thing I see. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I always knew it was good work," and I told him he was right. It was.